My job is to sell low-cost homeowners insurance in rural counties. Usually these customers only have rough cabins with wood fire heating, which runs up insurance costs and cannot be insured by the major companies. My own company takes up the slack. I arrived on a sunny morning at a very modest cabin in Banks County. It was at the end of a dirt road behind a small stand of trees. Much of the area is forested. I was greeted by a very old woman who told me that she lived alone but would like to take out a policy on her cabin. I needed to inspect the place and take some pictures, as is routine before offering a contract. I was walking around to the shed outside when I saw a totally hairy and muscular biped of some sort stacking wood. This thing wore no clothes but had very long hair covering its entire body. It had a black nose and very large eyes, and a mouth very much like a human being, but not quite. It was hard at work stacking wood and didn't seem to notice me. I should also mention that it was no bigger than around 3 foot 5 inches tall, if that even. It was, however, very plump and wide. It made a grunting sound as it worked. It seemed very strong. I asked the lady what on earth it was, and she casually replied that it was a woods helper, and that many of the county's old-timer residents had one of them from time to time to help with tasks that they were too old to handle. These woods helpers only asked for food and some drink. The woman also explained to me that they drank only beer and never seemed to be drunk or disorderly. She said they had been a blessing since long ago to many of the older people in the area. She did not know what species they were. In fact, she didn't even understand the word species, which is not unusual for rural people like her. She said that everybody knew about them, but that not many people liked to talk about it. I got one more look at the thing before I drove off. It was moving rocks into a runoff ditch this time. It looked like something from a sci-fi magazine or even a comic book. But it was real. When my grandmother and her sister were young, they saw a fairy. They had been fishing by a river and were walking through the long grass and plants around the river. They heard a hissing sound and saw a creature perched on a branch, watching them. They were both nature girls and spent most of their time outdoors, so they were more than familiar with the local plants and animals. But this was something they had never seen before. The creature reached out towards them and scared them so much they screamed, dropped their fish and tackle, and ran home. I wanted a detailed description from my grandma. She said it was small, only a few inches high, with large eyes. The thing she fixated on was that it had little hands that were gripping a branch and reaching. That was all she could recall in her old age. My mom had an experience as well. She told me when she was young and shared a bedroom with her sister, they had elves that would play in their windowsill at night. They never felt afraid. They were amused and looked forward to the visits. It was their secret. But as they got older, the elves either stopped visiting or the girls could no longer see them. Though I'm an artist, I've always been a skeptic for most strange things, unless I've seen it myself or cannot prove it in a rational way. My best friend, on the other hand, was always interested in paranormal stuff and would try to convince me to go fairy hunting with her by the seaside. I would just go along and try to have an open mind come what may, and in the beginning it was uneventful and most occurrences were still within my logical theories. But then, more and more strange things that I couldn't find a logical explanation for began happening. So much so that even I myself did some bit of researching on my own about the Fae, trying to reassure my doubts that I wasn't going crazy. There was this abandoned area close to where I live that was overrun with trees and bush that I always thought felt and looked almost magical, but I was hesitant to go there alone. We decided to explore it one evening as we thought it could be a fairy fort. It was still sunny with gentle gusts of wind, and we soon came up to what was an old gateway with no gate. I became a bit nervous as though we were about to enter someplace magical, but before I could take another step, my friend stopped me. She said that she felt as though the place had an intense sacred energy in the surrounding area and suggested we ask for permission before we enter. I didn't bother to argue with her since this was still new for me and she's had more experience seeing weird things. After we requested permission from any invisible beings that may be around, we entered the site. I felt a light yet compressed feeling had hit me, but that didn't prevent my eyes from wandering, admiring the scenery. I noticed that the congregation of trees in place were all different types, which seemed a bit strange to me at first, but then I paid it no mind. We explored further in, trying to, feel something, but from the corner of my eye, I kept seeing shifts. The shifts seemed like small people, near as tall as my knee. I looked directly and saw nothing, but as soon as I turned away, I could see one of them again, curiously, cautiously watching us. This is when I got nervous about if I was actually seeing correctly, so I tapped my friend's shoulder and she confirmed that she could actually see them too. That's when we both got the feeling that they were either gnomes or dwarves. We continued walking and I began to realize, strange enough, though we were among so many trees from the time we entered, there wasn't even the slightest bit of wind. My chest was feeling compressed. I was sweating and lightheaded since we first entered, but it was way more intense now. I kept checking with my friend to see if she was feeling ill too, and it was apparent we both were. We decided it was probably time to leave, but before we did, I remembered I had found a random quartz crystal in my garden a few days before, but it was definitely not something you'd find in the region I lived in. My friend suggested the idea of blessing the crystal, so I took it out of my pocket and chose to set it with the intention of being a key between realms, hoping to maybe be friends with the Fae. It seemed like an interesting idea at the time, so we did. After charging it with this intention so much as we could, we left the site. And as though it was magic, the compressed feeling disappeared as soon as we stepped back through the gate once again. The wind blew normally as it had before we first entered. It was so weird. We simply looked at each other and understood that the place we ventured into probably was not a normal one. After that, I've carried the crystal on me quite a few times, but each time I did, I felt either lightheaded, really nauseous, or just saw random things in the corner of my eye until I put it away again. My friend has also experienced the same feelings whenever I lent it to her. In July of 2003, when I was 10, my parents took me and my sister camping at Mont Tremblant in Quebec. We hiked in quite far because my dad wanted us to have a real camping experience, away from other families, cabins, and cars, so we were really far into the bush. At night, we took all our food and put it in a big bag and hung it up high in a tree away from our campsite to protect us and the food from bears. On about our third night, I woke up in my tent for no reason. I was sharing the tent with my sister, who was asleep. As I lay there thinking about how I needed to sleep because my dad said we were going to wake up at sunrise and go hiking, I started to hear music coming from somewhere outside. The music was really beautiful and strange. It sounded like it was coming from a flute or those panpipes, but it wasn't like anything I had ever heard before. I was thinking maybe some other family was camping near us and playing music, but there was something so strange about the music that I got a really ominous feeling, like I knew something wasn't right. I tried to wake up my sister, but she mumbled that she couldn't hear anything and then went back to sleep. So I decided to be brave and investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to look outside. I could still hear the music, but everything else was unusually quiet. That's when I noticed these floating orbs of light moving really fast between the trees. I flicked off my flashlight because I thought I would be able to see them better. It was very dark, but there was a full moon and lots of stars, so I could still see, sort of. That's when I saw two, what I thought were people walking between the trees side by side. They looked like tall humans, but were very slender and graceful when they moved, unusually so. They were dressed all in white and had a weird kind of glow to them, sort of like moonlight, except more bluish. The best way I can describe them is they were like the elves from the Lord of the Rings movies, but more real somehow, more graceful. I didn't see them for that long. They were moving quickly and my view was blocked by the trees. But they were headed towards the area where we had hung our food and were very silent as they moved. I didn't hear twigs snapping or anything like that, and I was holding my breath the whole time. They didn't seem threatening, but I just had a feeling that it would be better for me if they didn't see me. So I just went back into my tent and tried to stay quiet. The next day, everything at the campsite was normal. All the food was still there in the tree. I told my parents what I had seen, and they said I was probably dreaming. But I know I wasn't. When I was around 14, I was with a paramilitary type school out on training. I was set in charge of a squad, and we were playing war games that night in the woods under the full moon. We got somewhat turned around, and I ended up by myself next to a swamp. As I was looking for my way back, I saw something two-legged run past, with a long hat flowing behind it. It was around 3 feet tall. No one else was back there. I checked the next morning in the light. I could find my tracks, but no one else's near the swamp. I was too freaked out to go look on the swampy area to see if there were tracks there, but it woke me up to this being a bigger, wider, stranger world than what my parents or teachers told me. I hit it with my flashlight when it was running away, and it was there all right. It shocked me. To this day, I still wonder what it was. I remember the hat the most. It was long and reddish. I know the Cherokee talk of the little people, plus Pacific Islanders as well as numerous other cultures. There is more to this world than we think. When I was 7, my family moved to an old house in an area that wasn't developed. The house was really isolated, close to a river and surrounded by forests and fields. In the summer at night, I could hear owls and frogs and crickets singing. They could get pretty loud, and I remember sometimes I would have trouble falling asleep because of them. My bed was right under my window, so on nights like that, I would sit up and push my curtains aside and stare outside and watch the fireflies. It seemed like there were thousands of them zipping around the trees and grasses, blinking on and off. It was really magical, and this was great entertainment for me to just watch them and then slowly drift off to sleep. But sometimes, as I watched them, I would notice what looked like short, hooded figures walking through the field towards the forest. The field was a large area of overgrown grass. The grass was almost as tall as I was at that age, and I was probably around 4 feet, so the figures couldn't have been much taller than me since I could only see the tops of their hoods as they moved through the grass. I mostly saw them as dark, hooded shadows moving quickly across the field, and only on bright nights when the moon was full. They would always walk the same route, a sort of twisted path through the grass from a single maple tree in the middle of that field and then down a hill into the forest. I should say there was something very strange about that tree. It was a lone tree in the middle of a field, and I have read that trees like that grow by themselves are considered fairy trees. What was weird about it was that I didn't realize it was there until I almost ran right into it one day, despite the fact that I should have had a perfect view of it from my window. It was like it was invisible. When I looked out my window, all I saw was the field, no tree. But then one day my brother and I were playing in the long grass and I practically ran into it. And my first thought was, where did this tree come from? How did I not know this tree was here? It was a big, sturdy maple in the middle of a field, and yet I had never noticed it before from my window. When I went back home, I looked out my window to see if the tree was there, and at first I couldn't see it. It was like it had disappeared. But then I strained my eyes and really focused, and I was finally able to see it again. I even called my mom over and asked if she could see a tree in the field, and she said no, there's no tree, just grass. I tried to point it out to her, but she just couldn't see it. I'm 100% sure the tree was there though, because years later, when I was in my late teens, the area I lived in was starting to get more developed. Houses were being built on many of the open areas, including that field. one day when I came home from school, I saw construction men cutting down the long grass and cutting down that tree. I suddenly had this strong feeling that I should stop them, but I knew there was nothing I could do. So instead, I ran out there and asked the men if they would give me parts of the tree. I don't know what I thought I would do with it, but anyway, they were nice and gave me a big armful of branches. Back at home, I decided to open up the maple pods on the branches and bury some seeds in the backyard, thinking maybe a new tree would grow. To this day, I don't know why I wanted to do that. I just felt strongly that I had to plant those seeds. So I did, and eventually a tree did grow. 10 years later, and there's now a medium-sized maple tree in the backyard. But before then, when the tree was only a short sprout, I was outside one night watching the fireflies when I glanced at the sprout, and I swear I saw little people dancing in a circle around it. It was only for a second. When I looked again, they were gone. But in that second, I saw many little people wearing hoods and hats. The one I saw the best looked like a small, chubby child, almost Cupid-like, but wearing a dark blue shirt. He had a big smile on his face, so big that his eyes were shut like crescent moons, like he was having the time of his life dancing around. It was a moment I'll never forget, though it freaked me out a bit at the time. But I never felt any danger or maliciousness from them. I felt like they were happy and having a good time. Like maybe they allowed me to see them because they were thanking me for replanting their tree. Thanks for watching, and special thanks to the subscribers who submitted their stories for this one. Thanks also goes out to Danny, who runs a blog called What Did I See?, who gave me permission to read the story about the Woods Helper. A link to Danny's blog is in the description. Please do keep sending me your true fairy encounter stories, whether scary or not. They are so much fun to read. As always, my email is in the description. I also want to thank everyone supporting the channel on Patreon. It really means a lot, and everybody else who is supporting this channel in other ways, just by liking, commenting, sharing, and of course subscribing if you're new. I'm sending you all virtual fairy dust for good luck. If you want to support the channel on Patreon, there's a link in the description. Head over, there's a whole bunch of rewards and bonus material if you do, and of course, my everlasting thanks. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.